Hi, this is the walkthrough of the ePub to Rome conversion tool I built. The objective I set for myself was to create a frictionless experience that will integrate book highlights and literature notes into Rome when reading ePub books, but doing this in a way that I don't need to load the full source text into my main Rome graph, but at the same time I can still maintain traceability. So what I'm going to cover in this video is I'm going to explain the overall process. I'll briefly walk you through the Python code and we will run it. I'm going to import the files that were created into Rome, and then I'm going to demonstrate the process of taking some dummy literature notes based on this. So jumping right to the overall process, I'm making an assumption that you have an ePub book available. But if not, then there's plenty of places to download one from. I'm going to run the Python script, and then we will need to import the files into an empty Rome graph and read the book, create literature notes. So quite a straightforward process. So jumping right to the Python code. First of all, let me just bring up the code itself and talk you through that. The link to this is in the video description. So there are a couple of warnings here. First of all, if you would decide to load the JSON that's created here into your main graph, make sure you do a backup first. I actually recommend loading the book into a separate empty graph because with the number of blocks increasing in your Rome database, the speed of Rome decreases. I tested this with trying to load multiple translations of the Bible with cross-references, and I experienced that already around 50,000 blocks in the database, Rome was visibly sluggish. When I hit something like 90,000 blocks, then it was really a major pain in terms of speed. One book, depending on the size of the book, is somewhere between, say, 1,000 blocks to 10,000 blocks. So the book we are going to look at today, Finite and Infinite Games by James P. Carse, is about 1,000 blocks long, but say, for example, A War and Peace from Tolstoy is over 10,000 blocks long. Yes, it's still shorter than the Bible. The Bible, a single translation, is about 30,000 blocks. But still, imagine you read 10 books or 12 books in a year like Finite and Infinite Games. That will already take you to a considerable number of blocks in Rome, and over the years this is going to result in your graph slowing down. So putting it all together, I do recommend putting the full text corpus into a separate temporary graph, as I'm going to show you how. The work plan in the ePub is, yes, you download the ePub book. We will connect Google Drive. I'm assuming that you're going to be running this in Colab, which I highly recommend. This is a free online Python environment provided by Google. So we're going to connect our Google Drive. In the code, I'm going to show you, we're not going to go into details, but I'm going to show you some of the helper functions I created. We are going to load the ePub into an array and then export to JSON. So in terms of Google Drive, let me just show you the folder structure I have here. So this is my Google Drive synchronized on my PC, and this is my Rome Playground folder. Here I have two books, Finite and Infinite Games, and I have War and Peace, and I have an ePub output folder, and within that now I'm going to explain about the book base JSON a bit later. I have a single file, otherwise this is empty. I'm going to place a link also to the book-based JSON in the video description as well. So that's what's in my Google folder. If I come back here, you can see that I'm setting up a set of variables here that you need to set for yourself depending on your book and the location on your drive where you put the content. But yeah, so you can see this is the finite and infinite games. I don't have the file extension, so I don't have .epub here. Also make note that the input file name is going to be the namespace within which the book is created, and you will see later that this namespace will also be created in your main graph as well as you move your highlights into your main Rome graph. So let me just execute this short script here. It's asking for authorization, so I need to connect my Google Drive. I click Accounts, I choose my account, I allow this, and I get a code that I copy and I paste in here. And with that, I have connected my Google Drive for this session to Colab. Now, moving on, you see it's been mounted. I have 4 Rome helper functions. One is to create a Rome-like unique identifier for the blocks. The other is to get a timestamp. And then 2 functions, one to add a new page, and the other is to add a child, or rather add a block to the page. So I'm not going to walk through these codes. All you need to do is to run this script, and as it runs, it creates these functions. So you can see it executed and we're done. So then loading the ePub file into an array, there's a couple of things I want to highlight here. So first of all, I didn't even attempt to create a program that will automatically uncover the structure of the file and provide you with a perfect book structure. The main reason is ePub is really a zipped set of HTML documents, and the different files I looked at all follow very different structures, so there isn't a strong standard of what to expect within an ePub document. What I'm doing is I'm taking the HTML heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, heading 4 tags and try to recreate a table of contents and structure based on that. In some cases, this doesn't result to an acceptable result. In that case, you will need to do a bit of troubleshooting and adjust the code. I'm actually providing a text output as well. We will look into that in a second, and that is to help you with troubleshooting and some configurations. The other thing I do in here is I replace some of the basic HTML components with markdown equivalents. So I'm taking bold and using double asterisks, I'm taking italics, and I'm also taking the image tags in HTML and converting them into markdown. Now with the images, what I'm doing is I'm looking for the source and the alt parameters of the image tag, and I'm actually converting the source into a web-based link. So what I'm typically the source looks like this, that you have /images/image whatever JPEG. This is what you would find within the text. What I'm doing is I'm cutting down the first part of this and I'm replacing it with the image base URL. So you will need to either copy the files, the image files from the ePub onto the internet. I use GitHub for this, you'll see in a second, or you can also host it on localhost. That should work as well, and I'll also show you how to identify this image-based URL. So you need to set the image-based URL. I already uploaded these images to GitHub, and this is Finite and Infinite Games. So if I come here to my GitHub, then you can see that here are the images from the file. Also, let me just show you what's under the hood in an ePub file, just that you get the full understanding. So here's the ePub file that we're going to be uploading. So if I go here and change this to a zip archive, then I can simply unpack it as a zip file, and you see there's all sorts of folders here, and you will need to search around, so each folder structure even looks different from ePub to ePub, so it's not always in ops where you find images. Sometimes they're in the root folder, sometimes somewhere else. The point is, in this case, I found images here, and I simply copied the contents of this folder to my GitHub that I showed you here. So you can see this is the images folder from that. So getting back to our script, I'm just going to simply run this. What this is doing is this is also installing a couple of components. Yeah, it takes a bit of time, but yeah, we are done. And now that I have my functions ready, I need to call read ePub with the file name I want to process. I also have this book from book 2 variable here. Don't worry about this. You can just simply set it to 0 and -1, which means it will load the full book. In some cases, you might want to cut the beginning or the end of the book, and yeah, this is part of the troubleshooting that you may need to do as you look at different documents. But so now I'm going to click run here, and what happens right now is the book is loaded, and as well here at this point in this function I'm also creating a text output. So now in my playground ePub output directory, I have this text document that was created. So let me just show you what you find in this text document. So this is not a very attractive document, but you can already see that here you can see here's an image tag, and you see that the source is /images backcover JPEG. So this is how I identified where to put the files and what to put into my base URL. Also, this is an interesting, from a structure perspective, an interesting book. This only has heading level 3 headings, and that's the way it's structured. But yeah, so you can look into this text file, and sometimes it's quite necessary to do some troubleshooting. But assuming that you're lucky, that maybe you don't even have to open this up, and this will work, especially if you don't care about having or not having the images in your Rome book. I have some functions here that we can run. This shows me what was actually imported, and you can see from the document we had earlier on screen, you can see that this is how it's been transformed. So this is helpful again to see if everything is working correctly. And so then we come to the step of creating the actual Rome JSON structures. And so I'm just going to simply click play. And hopefully it runs, but no, I actually miss a character here. So now I'm going to click, sorry guys, I'm going to click play here. And yes, so now the code executed well. And what we have here is it gives me an output. We have 1230 blocks and 105 pages that were created. I can also look into the actual JSON that was generated. Maybe I'll just look at the first 10. So if I click run, I can look at what was generated. This could be also interesting depending on the need for troubleshooting or not. And then finally we come to exporting the files. I click here and the two documents are created. So if I come to my ePub output folder, it will take Google Drive maybe a couple of seconds to synchronize the files here, but you can see the files were synchronized, so I'm ready to load this into Rome. So what I'm going to do now is I've already created, this is a completely empty Rome graph, so I'm going to be loading the ePubs in here. So let me just close this, and I'm just going to click on import files, and I'm going to choose 3 files. So I'm loading the book base, I'm loading the corpus and the table of contents, and I'm clicking import. You can see there's 108 files. It is 3 files more, and that is because I have 3 pages in my book base. One is a Rome.js page, the other is a Rome CSS page, and the third one was an empty daily notes page by default. So if I open up first of all Rome.js, you will need to run Rome.js. I have a small script here, not extremely exciting. What this does is when you double click on a block of text, it copies it to the clipboard, making it into a block quote in Rome. So I need to run my Rome.js. Maybe I'll just put that in my shortcuts. I also have a Rome CSS page, and I have a very simple CSS. What I'm doing is, as I'm exporting each of the blocks, I'm adding a hidden tag to the beginning of each block, and that tag, I'll show you in a second, will provide me traceability. And that is needed because if I'm just copying block references from one graph to the other, then of course those block references don't work. Let me show you that in a second. But now we want to look into the book as well. So I look for table of contents. And so you can see I have the table of contents here. I have also made a mistake in the code. So let me just show you the mistake. In the final version, you will see this here. This is what happens when you do a last minute change to your code. So this is the mistake I did, and this is why it didn't work. This is how this line should have been. And then instead of in file name, you would read finite and infinite games there. That's an unfortunate small mistake. But anyway, this is the namespace. If you don't like to see namespaces, I don't, then you can come in here and simply hide the namespaces. And with that, the book chapters will just look like this. So the numbering in case of finite and infinite games if you look at the actual paper book as well, these are the actual chapter titles. So this is not just a simple sequence numbering, but this is the chapter titles Mr. Kars chose to use. And so if I open up chapter 1, then you can see I have chapter 1 here. I have a link to the next page, to the previous page, and always back to the table of contents. If I click chapter 2, I get to chapter 2 and so on. So what I want to show you is if I click here within the block, then you see that actually at the beginning of the block I have the link to this page up here, and this is what's going to provide me the traceability, because on each page I know which page that text came from. So that is very helpful. And so first of all, let's open up now my main graph, main Rome graph on the side. Let's put it here. I'm going to close the sidebar, and I'm going to close this sidebar as well. So this is now the reading experience, or at least one version of the reading experience. So say I'm interested in this block or this paragraph, and I would want to make some notes around it. I double click on this and I can then paste it in here. So my script copies the text and puts this block quote in front of it. So if I now press enter, then I have this quote here, and I can take notes. And I can even come in here and I can highlight whatever I want. So I'm not going to, these are now just dummy notes, but maybe I want to highlight that part of the sentence. And then if I read on, maybe I'm going to now just run a couple of pages, and maybe I'm interested in this paragraph. So I double click, I paste, and I take my notes, and so on. And the final bit I wanted to show you here is here in the sidebar, I already have my Rome CSS. And what I wanted to show you is for these tags to be hidden in my main graph, I had to copy in exactly the same CSS into my Rome CSS. Here you can see Rome CSS as I had in the book. And I only need to do this once. That's why I'm starting or creating this namespace ePub books here. And so that's pretty much the process. There's one alternative way you may want to take notes. So if I would create literature notes here in my book, I could also actually do the very same, and I can take notes here. And when I'm done, I can simply copy this and come to my main graph and paste it, and it will look nice, and that works as well. What I wanted to show you is the bit around the block references. So say I want to copy the block reference for this and have the block reference here, and then type my notes. Now the problem with this is when I copy this text, then of course in my main graph that reference doesn't exist. So then this is the reason why I opted for including the location of the file. And if you read these books, you can always go ahead, and when you're done, so I'm going to close this. When you're done reading a book, you can always come in here and you can export your book and archive it in EDN. And if later on you want to go back to the absolute source of your book, then you can always find the location from where you have taken the quote from. Now, finally, what I want to show you, because I skipped that by mistake, is this thing around the images. So let's just walk back to the beginning of the book, to the opening page. So you can see here I have these images. If the images don't show, then you can open up and look at the link and figure out what might be wrong with your link. And also in some cases these images aren't that important for the book. Like in this case, I don't really need the front and the back of the book. That is not so important. So I hope you found this demonstration helpful. And so what we covered was, we looked at the overall process of downloading a book, running the Python script, importing files into your graph, and creating literature notes. And in the meantime, we looked at the text output. We looked a bit under the hood of the ePub files, looked at how to copy files, the images, and how to locate where to put them. And then we did the import to Rome, looked at the book-based JSON, the corpus, and the table of contents. And then finally, I demonstrated to you how I would take literature notes in my main graph using this approach. And we covered the two small bits that you need to turn on in your imported file, the Rome.js and the Rome CSS that you also need to copy into your main database. I hope you found this helpful, and let me know if you have any questions or you have ideas for how to further improve this process.